buried that information effectively. And what they did, though, more damagingly, is they ran a very sophisticated, skilled and successful disinformation campaign. So they literally killed, I don't know how many, let's say tens of thousands of people, or contributed to their deaths. He was an unbelievable player. I loved him. The way he just got it and just glided past players, and his free kicks, his passing ability. Wow, what a player. In fact, I think it was that year, I remember they played Manchester United at Old Trafford and they beat them. And that was an unbelievable performance. They were so good.
Fair Dinkum.
G'day guys, welcome to the Fair Income podcast. We've got a very special one for you today. We've got former Socceroo's captain, Mr. Craig Foster, on the podcast. He's not only a footballer, but also an activist, an author, and he is probably most prominent for his commentary on SBS, especially when World Cups come around and stuff. So I want to say welcome to Craig.
Craig. Hi, Suhail. How you going? Nice to join you.
Nice to see you too. Thank you for joining us. It's actually an honor for us, all football heads here in the room. So it's good it's good to have you on. I want to start off by saying, obviously you're currently in Sydney, so you're struggling with a bit of a lockdown at the moment. How's things down there?
Well, we're largely unaffected here. Whether it's my family or myself, I get out as an essential worker. Most mornings of the week, I go to a community centre in Marrickville in the inner west of Sydney and volunteer, pack food hampers for people. Of course, the need is, extreme at the moment and growing. So there's a lot of stress on all of the people there and the volunteers even, let alone the people who are missing out. But I'm very privileged, with the life I've led and where I am. And, I've got a house, I've got a roof over my head for starters, I've got food to eat tonight, and we don't need to worry about where it's coming from next week or the week after. So I always acknowledge that. That's why I get out and try and help others, because so many people right now have fallen through the cracks and they've been struggling for a long time. They haven't had a voice. In Australia, the casual workforce, asylum seekers and refugees, newly arrived migrants, many parts of the community who have been forgotten, have been invisible, who people weren't concerned about, and all of a sudden are looking around and saying, well, hang on a minute, these people aren't able to lock down, they're not allowed to stay home because they can't exist 2 days. They don't have enough savings. How did this happen? Well, it's important that we all understand it was happening. And it's now become visible. And so I just hope that after COVID, we're going to be able to reshape some parts of Australian society and perhaps globally, so that, less people are in this situation.
Definitely. I wanted to touch on, for example, like what or when it was that you actually decided to fall into the whole activist stuff.
Well, I was always working in social programs. So from a very young age as a player, I was working in Indigenous rights organisations. I was coaching young Indigenous kids and Indigenous teams and things. I felt strongly about it. By the time I was in the mid-20s, when I became a Socceroo, actually, I was politically active. That is, I was speaking during the referendum on the Republic. I believe that Australia should stand on our own 2 feet. I think it's an important part of growing up as a nation. And so I was speaking at that time with a couple of other athletes. Rochelle Hawkes was the captain of the Hockey Roos, and with Malcolm Turnbull at the town hall here in Sydney and other things. So I was always socially and or politically active. It's just that I then went from being an ambassador, sitting on directorships of various charities and social justice organisations, to then just being much more vocal. As my public profile grew, I was able to use that to the benefit of those groups, those individuals, and those organisations. That's all.
It's awesome, because quite often we see celebrities always using the platform to kind of I'm just saving my I'm just saving my image by just getting like, I'll just attach my name to a thing. But we kind of see you hands-on with like companies such as Amnesty International and stuff. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the work that you do with them?
So I'm basically an ambassador with Amnesty. I sit on the Australia Committee for Human Rights Watch, which means I have a more active advisorial role. Whereas with Amnesty, I helped build a campaign for refugees and asylum seekers with them called Game Over. I raised some money for them, from the community and high net worth individuals in Australia to get that campaign up and running. That's to resettle all the asylum seekers and refugees from offshore still in Nauru and PNG, and that's very quickly become also those onshore here to get them out of, the A-pods, the hotels and the torturous environment that they've been in for 8 years. So my relationship with Amnesty, it started with the refugee community sponsorship scheme. And the idea of that is that communities and LGAs, councils and community groups, civil society around the country can raise some funds to sponsor a refugee to come to the country. And it's a very good scheme, very successful in Canada, in part because when community groups are mobilised to support a refugee coming to any country, by nature then they wrap around their support around that person. So it means that people aren't just arriving by themselves without support networks. And so it's been very successful in other countries. It does exist here in Australia, but it's prohibitively expensive, which simply means that the government doesn't want it to work. It costs something like $75,000 upfront just to be able to sponsor someone and these types of things. So I started there some years ago supporting that in order to change policy. And then I've just continued on since then. I do agree with you. I think it's not just high profile people, but I think society has got to a point where the business community, a large part of the academic community, much of civil society, but particularly workers, employees, directors, management of the Australian business and sports community. And sport, I'm talking here about professional sport largely, which is a business. And therefore it's conditioned by its sponsors, it's conditioned by its corporate relationships, not by human rights or the athletes. I think as a society, we've got ourselves into a place where too many people are reluctant to speak out. And so to the extent that more people do so, I think it's extremely important. Take, for instance, this morning, the day I'm talking to you on, Grace Tame, the current Australian of the Year, has written a very powerful piece, I think in the Sydney Morning Herald, about the decision by Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, to appoint one of his cabinet to a higher office. And, a minister who has, historic sexual assault allegations, they're still really on foot in the public domain. And Grace Tame has come out in a very powerful, strong, authentic and principled way. And I think it's beautiful, wonderful, because, Australian of the Year is a really good example of what we would call, being co-opted. That means the way that most people operate in the business community is if you're too outspoken, or the sports community, if you're too outspoken on these types of issues, you can be marginalised, you can be ostracised, and all of a sudden their corporate career is compromised. The same thing happened to me, by speaking out for refugees and asylum seekers. There is a cost. But the point, more of us have to ask the question as to whether that cost, how we quantify that cost. Actually, there's a benefit. There's a net benefit. There might be a commercial cost, but the benefits far outweigh that. And so Australia in particular, I think much of the West, US and others have got themselves in a position where people don't really want to speak out about anything. Well, and that's why we are where we are. We've got a planet that's on fire. We've got, political class with no accountability, with very significant and constant rorting, taxpayer dollars. We've got the cost of university degrees going up. And, we've got so many issues that should be really straightforward to solve, but not enough people are talking about them for that reason. So I was talking about the unit cost of speaking out at the moment is still quite high. And there are many more people much more brave than me, I must say. But the unit cost, that means the cost to me or to you, is still reasonably high. The more people who are politically, socially engaged and willing to speak up, the less the unit cost. Because then you're talking about collectivism, so if everyone's talking about what we need to do in renewables, then your voice, there's no cost to you adding your voice to that. And that's how social progress happens.
I think we saw that in like the Colin Kaepernick saga. So like a lot of the NFL footballers were like, they didn't want to touch the situation of a 10-foot pole because first of all, they didn't have guaranteed contracts. And then on top of that, also like they're trying to take care of their families and stuff. And then you can hear all of the managers and the owners saying like, there is no chance that you guys can stay on this team kneeling and doing whatever you want to do. Like we're running a business here, and you're gonna put that at risk. And also you can see it from the recent Euros when you hear the booing in the background from kneeling footballers and stuff like that. So, and you can see that like collectively when you get like a group of people to kind of move in one direction, it's a lot more powerful than just individuals, And
that's why the early movers are so courageous. Okay, because let's say, for instance, you're talking about anti-racism now and Black Lives Matter and things. So you've got an England a shirt on there. So let's talk about Sterling, Raheem Sterling. So some years ago, 3, 4, maybe years, maybe more, he's been very active on that. And so the early movers, they're going to acquire much more of a blowback because society at that time is not ready to move. And the areas of society who actively don't want to move, so the racists, for example, or political communities or parts of civil society which are anti-immigration or, whatever the case is, they're going to push back hard then because they still have some social resonance. They feel as though they still have some control of the situation. So when you're going into these types of new issues, those people need real courage. I think they're incredible. And then what happens is, and often those people lose their career. Often sometimes they lose their reputation. And it's only, 30, 40 years later when people are acknowledged. I mean, the first protests in sport, if we're talking about sport, some of the first, one of the most high profile was in '68, was the Black Power salute, of course, of John Carlos and Tommy Smith, and Pete Norman, the Australian, stood in solidarity with them. Of course, they lost their career. Both of them ended up trying to play NFL, in actual fact, right? Whereas today, sport has come full circle, and Colin Kaepernick is now saying, well, I'm doing the same thing. And you've got WNBA players who've been amazing. The beauty is that athletes are now claiming their own power. And the point I'm trying to make is that I think more people are trying to, I hope they're doing it across society, doing the same thing. In other words, saying, look, I'm an employee of this company, but I'm a human being first. So Simone Biles, the legendary, the world's greatest female gymnast ever, goes there and she says, look, my mental health is not in a great place. It's a sexual assault survivor for starters, right? Plus, I'm sure, I don't know, it's not my lived experience, but people are saying that, she's carrying a great burden also in terms of Black Lives Matter and all of these things. And so she goes there and she can't do it. And what she's saying is very important. She's saying, I might work for Woolies, or I might be a legendary gymnast, or I might be Colin Kaepernick, or I might be a lawyer, or I might be a food hamper packer at Addison Road Community Centre in Marrickville like me. But I'm a person first. And therefore, I'm not walking across there just because you're paying me. Doesn't mean I have to walk over that thing and then be treated in a racist manner, not be able to recognise my religious rights and freedoms and holidays, that I'm going to turn a blind eye to the fact that, you're making all the footballs, with 8-year-old kids in a country with lower socioeconomic value for people, right? I'm not going to overlook those things, and I'm not going to overlook the fact that, we're spewing out toxic CO2 and burning the planet, right? Whereas in the past, not too long ago, people were going, well, do you know what? I work there and that's my job, and I can compartmentalize that to my life. And what I'm hoping that COVID done is it's just destroyed that barrier where people go, no, it's my life. Okay. And actually we all recognize that you might lose it.
Yeah.
Right. So people are questioning and saying, well, what does my life stand for? Like, who the hell am I? Because when I go to work, I'm a lawyer and I'm writing contracts to enable fossil fuel companies to destroy environmental law. Like, is that okay with me or not? Right. So there's or I'm a public servant and I'm going to work and I'm implementing policy that's torturing refugees and people are actually dying. Am I any longer willing to just say, well, I'm just bringing it to life, I'm just doing what I'm told? Am I actually, so I think much of that has changed, and I hope it changes a hell of a lot more, because I think we need a lot of social change and progress.
100%. And you can obviously see that, like, people are starting to realize that you can't just really handball those responsibilities off to the next man or the next woman in line. And then but then you also see vice versa, like on the other side, where the person is like just kind of like giving it lip service, and they're just like, okay, I don't want to be the odd one out in this situation as well. So they'll follow blindly. You know what I mean?
That's true. That's true. So there's a lot to be said for, people have a right to express, their view, and the contrary view is important because it makes, everyone consider, and test their theories, right? So, this is why democracy is very important. You saw the Belarusian, I'm not sure if she was a gymnast, but basically, said something about her coach or the environment in Belarus. And they basically said, this is at the recent Olympics, and they said, oh, get yourself home, you're in trouble. And now she's seeking asylum, and, some countries are taking her. Sadly for her, she's probably better off not coming to Australia, because she'll end up 8 years in, Manus Island and then in a hotel, right? That's the reality of the situation. But, that's a different issue. But, you need contrary views. The problem that we have in the world at the moment, and where also sport has to play a role, is that disinformation and misinformation is a global industry that the world has never had to face at this level. And therefore, perfectly well-meaning people are digesting a diet of just lies and rubbish in a way that has never happened in human history. And the delivery mechanisms today, which is largely social media, are delivering more information to us at a more sophisticated level than ever in history. And much of that is nefarious, inaccurate, dangerous, and extremely damaging. So if we go back, and then people tend to not work that out until later, but the problem is we're facing, very significant existential issues, even like the planet and pandemics. And so, like, it's urgent, people going down the wrong paths at this time is extremely damaging to everyone. Whereas it used to be that people were just on the fringe, which with some crazy conspiracy theories, but they couldn't sell those in a sophisticated manner to the rest of the place. They had to actually prove and find a voice and bring people along. So what worries me is, the tobacco industry did this very well, and it's been copied then by the fossil fuel industry as well. So if you remember back in as early as the 50s, there was research saying that, tobacco and cigarettes in particular, caused cancer.
Yep.
And the tobacco industry, Benson Hedges and others, they buried that information effectively. And what they did, though, more damagingly, is they ran a very sophisticated, skilled, and successful disinformation campaign. So they literally killed, I don't know how many, let's say tens of thousands of people, or contributed to their deaths. Later, of course, they had to pay billions and billions and billions in compensation. We're back there again, because that's what's happened on climate research, which as early as 50s, 60s, 70s, and certainly by 80s, Shell, Exxon, Mobil and other companies, we know, had research that very accurately predicted the heating of the planet due to man-made activities, in particular CO2. And so they knew very well. But what they have done is run a very coordinated, very sophisticated, and very successful disinformation campaign to question science. And so it's got us to a point, sadly, in a pandemic, came at a time when people questioned science and medical advice and fraternity and expertise and experience to a greater degree, perhaps, than ever in history. So anyway, the point is, we all need to, we all need to speak up about these issues when it comes to democracy or human rights in particular, which is the field where I spend a lot of my time.
Definitely. And we can see that a lot of people cling on to truths, whether or not they are the truth, is yet to be seen. Like, for example, with the pandemic, and like you were saying, the conspiracy theorists, they kind of they grip onto anything that will help them, find something to hang on to. And they have a saying like, it stand for something or fall for nothing, So I wanted to see what was it that really sparked a light for you? Was it who was the who was a catalyst in your activist career?
Yeah, so just on that, so many of the drivers of people, and I'm not an expert I'm not a professor on conspiracy theories but I think many of the drivers of it are right. They're positive. People want to question. People have, a lack of trust in political figures and leaders, as do I. I think we're at a horrible place in terms of leadership and accountability and so on in Australia. And the trust of pharmaceutical companies and the trust of corporations, who've been destroying the ocean and destroying the planet, I think that's all, those drivers are great. The problem is when you then seek information as to what alternatives are or why this is occurring, there's just so much rubbish out there that is, you don't know who's behind it. You don't know why they're pushing these agendas, and it's just horrible. So it's actually, we're in an environment at the moment where it's very difficult for people to know who or what to trust, and that's a really bad place to be, because people can then clutch on to disinformation, misinformation. You saw, for instance, recently Alan Jones and MP Craig Kelly recently talking on Sky News, so-called Sky After Dark, after 6 p.m, I think it is, and just talking utter rubbish, utter lies about the Delta variant of COVID and the effectiveness or otherwise of vaccines. It was just absolute disinformation. That is to say, it was wrong and it's dangerous. And so now, unfortunately, YouTube have taken, I think, the whole organisation off for 7 days, and they've taken those videos off. And I say unfortunately, because if YouTube, with all of the rubbish that they spew all around the world and disinformation that they've allowed, and particularly in relation to climate and other things, which are issues that really deeply affect us all, if they think that it's inappropriate what those people are saying, and yet the broadcast regulator in Australia has done nothing, that tells us a lot. That Australia's got ourselves in a place where you're pretty much able to say virtually anything without any real consequences on air, and those consequences to yourself, but those consequences are extremely damaging. At a time when people need to follow public health guidelines, and of course we should all be questioning those guidelines, because governments have a history by nature of going too far, and wanting too much control and wanting too much power. This is the nature of every government. Of course, we should be questioning the public health guidelines and the information and so on, but that's very different, because ultimately we're still all together saying we know that we have responsibility to public health. We just want you guys to prove, why these things are necessary and where the balance lies and so on. That's very different to saying oh, this thing doesn't exist, or this thing is overblown, or this thing, vaccines don't work, or we should be injecting ourselves with bleach, like, idiot Trump, or, it's like this crazy stuff, right? And it's very, very damaging, very damaging. So my dog's going a bit crazy here. So anyway, that's lockdown.
No one could get out, huh? But how I'll just touch on Alan Jones a little bit because I'm from a Lebanese Muslim background and obviously lived through the Cronulla riots and all that sort of stuff. So I was kind of like, I wouldn't say victim too, but more so like I was there for the whole, I was there for the whole like, and he kind of like was the catalyst for it. So he knows that he's got like some sort of influence on, like what we call like the far right of Australia. And for him to say damaging stuff like that, just to like spark further stuff is very irresponsible.
Yeah, I agree. And, these dangerous misogynistic comments and things, they're not being taken with enough seriousness. And we've seen what's happened, extremism on all forms, including what happened in Christchurch and so on. And then people don't want to take any responsibility for the fact that they've been, spewing this hateful stuff out for over a period of years and then inciting or supporting violence, which occurred down in Cronulla. It's very, very serious. So there's two aspects to that. One is, are these people doing this because it's who they are, in which case they shouldn't be on air anyway, or are they doing it because this is the audience to which, they are talking and the audience that's responding to them, and therefore they're doing it for purely commercial reasons? And either or, it's disgusting. So I watched a documentary not too long ago. So, I've taken some interest in these conspiracy theory formulas because the world is in a bad place there. And I think we all need to understand to some degree how this has come about, who's driving it, and how we can fight back. And I watched a documentary, happened to be on a far right, just absolute idiot, who by the name of Alex Jones. And this person so Sandy Hook massacre happened in a school. And this is a really great example. For anyone who's confused about this, just go and watch, work on this person. And Sandy Hook occurred and, a number of kids were massacred in a school in America. And he had his own, far right, idiotic, chaotic environment where he immediately started saying, well, this is fake. This is a deep state conspiracy, whatever he said, CIA are involved and blah, blah, blah. And all of these people here are actors. Yeah, I think this was on the day. If not, it was very close afterwards, right? These people, and he's talking about parents here of dead children, right? And so these people are actors, and I've got information that this is just a whole conspiracy and this is not real and they're trying to trick you and blah, 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 blah. Now, that person was making literally millions of dollars in propagating these theories, this misinformation, disinformation, these lies, and so therefore, that's shocking. That's shocking. That shouldn't be allowed. And YouTube and other channels who are doing these things have to be really called to account. We see this with racism, huge amount of racism that's being propagated on these social media channels, and abuse, particularly of women. We see that a lot in sport. And these things have to be brought to a head. These things have to be challenged now, because I hope the pandemic, certainly the climate, should already have taught us that, this is anti-human rights, this is anti-social, this is anti-community, this is anti-progress, this is anti-human future. This stuff is dangerous.
So it's like we've moved into a state where the world is just basically like working off instant gratification in all aspects, So like it's all about making or lining my pockets now. You know, what can I get now? While this, like for example, I know that a lot of people are on this cryptocurrency wave. You know, and like for example, GameStop was like a bit of had a bit of a situation where everyone used it as like a kind of like a stick it to the man thing. But GameStop is like there's livelihoods attached to it. You know, there's people that are on the other end that are like they're waiting on, you know, like their futures on what's going to happen, and then somebody just gets like, you know, they just toy with power, you know, and they just kind of like take and give, and they don't really care about the whole, like everyone's just like an ant to them, you know. So yeah, like I agree with you on what you're saying of stuff like
I
that.
think the good thing at the moment is there's a lot of alternate thinking. People are questioning, and that's good. The problem is we're getting disinformation, we're getting lies as we question. But the questioning is important. Like, you know, how did we get the planet into this environment? How did we get the sea full of plastic? How did we get extinction of so many animals? How are we still, you know, deforesting and burning the Amazon? How do we get in a position where so many right-wing, authoritarian idiots are able to get themselves elected? Like, how did that happen? You know, how do we get ourselves to a position where so many people have unstable work and, you know, no human dignity? How is homelessness rising? You know, how is it that we have a royal commission 30 years ago into Indigenous deaths in custody and virtually nothing or not enough has been implemented in 30 years? And how do we get ourselves to a place where people just don't care about others? And the pandemic is a great example. I mean, the pandemic hit at a time when society is more individualistic, perhaps, than it's ever been. I don't know, I'm not a historian, but, you know, and so therefore, all of a sudden, you're asking people to make sacrifices for others. And it's a very interesting time. It's obviously an awful pandemic, and you know, it's going to have a number of variations, and there's no doubt that it's going to change the world in many ways. One way it should change the world is us all, you know, looking around and saying, well, hang on a minute, we all agree to be together in society. That's what a society is. You know, if you want to live by yourself and not have access to the roads and hospitals, and I mean, they all cost in Australia too much at the moment, but and the universities and the telecommunications infrastructure and Medicare that all of us pay through our taxes, then you have actually a responsibility. You are not a society of one. And this is what some of the issue with, you know, the conservative thinking of politics. You know, Margaret Thatcher said before her age of horrible austerity, when, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, were put out of work and poverty spiked in the UK. She said, oh, there's no such thing as society. You know, the only thing that really matters is individual freedom and rights. And I say, well, if that's the case, go and live on an island somewhere by yourself, because you are participating in our society, you are benefiting from our society, and we're all contributing to that. And part of that is corporations paying their tax, and and so so transnational tax schemes and all these things are increasingly being looked at, which I think is great, by the OECD. Recently, they signed off on what they propose. Whether they ever put it into place is another matter. But, you know, I think people around the world should be talking about transnational tax schemes, and the fact that, you know, these multinationals go around the world, are housed in Panama or elsewhere, and pay no tax in the country of source where the revenue comes from. And so all of these issues are very significant. And I think what we saw with Trump is that these issues have made people feel marginalised, have made them feel powerless, have made them feel as though no one cares about them, have made them feel as though big business and, you know, and politicians or whoever are fleecing them. And that powerlessness has been manipulated by people like Trump and Bolsonaro and others to get themselves into power. And what's become clear is that they're actually even worse. You know, whilst they tell you that they're going to fix it, they actually are there to profit from it. So that whole movement and where we've got ourselves to is a very powerful state to consider change. The problem is there's some really sophisticated organisations and people around the world in leveraging that for their own nefarious purposes. So it's a really interesting time in history, but it's also an extremely challenging one.
Definitely. All this stuff's extraordinary to me because it's like I've been built off like a blue collar family. So like my family's always been like, run your own small business, stay in your corner, make sure that your community is good, make sure that the people around you, close cousins and all that sort of stuff, everyone's doing well. And then like, you don't really think of things as a whole. You kind of think of things in your own bubble and you want to make sure that everyone's okay. But then like, there's also like the butterfly effect. So there's like a butterfly like flapping its wings here can cause a tsunami on the other side of the world. So it's like, and for us in our religion, so because Islam teaches us like the way to change the environment around you is to first change what's internal, and yeah, so it's like a lot of the times I think we can get to a place where we want to be by introspection and like for everyone to like just look into what's going on inside themselves and how can I improve or how can I do my bit, whether it's like you were saying for the environment, like you see rubbish on the floor, we just look past, or like what's that one piece of rubbish going to do? There's like billions of people on earth, man. If everyone picked up one piece of trash every day, like we clean the earth in like a year or so, so like definitely, yeah. But I wanted to, sorry.
Injustice is a big word, right? So I think that's right. So the first point is, don't lecture others on doing things that you're not doing yourself. And I think society is calling that out more than ever, particularly with businesses. Okay, well, you guys are talking about, you got a RAP, Rio Tinto, you've got a reconciliation action plan, and you're probably on Elevate, which is, the top level, so you're holding this up as, we're really pro Indigenous rights at the same time that you're destroying caves, with ancient, historic, cultural sites. Like that's not going to work anymore. And it's good. It's good that society has increasingly called that out. That's really important. But also, people need to work together to create a fairer, more even society. And that's about injustice, in my view. It doesn't matter what religion it is. I think at the heart of it is about, treating other people in a fair manner and ensuring that people aren't mistreated in particular, right? So and this is kind of where Australia's at. We've always talked about egalitarianism, equality and fairness, and they're very important principles. But actually what Australia really needs to do is to go from that to injustice. And so it's a bit like Harmony Day. So, Harmony Day was there's a day called the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination under the United Nations. Now, this day was commemorated some decades ago because during apartheid, black South Africans protested and a number of them were murdered, shot by police forces. And so this day symbolises being against racial discrimination. In other words, it's an anti-racism day. What John Howard did in a conservative government is he said, well, we don't want to talk about anti-racism. I don't want to talk about racism. I want to pretend that it doesn't exist. Because if I need to talk about racism, I have to talk about colonisation. I have to talk about the start of modern Australia. I have to talk about, massacres and terra nullius. I have to talk about how, we interjected this entire fallacy of law, over the top of Indigenous sovereignty, right? So I'm not going to talk about racism. I don't even want to acknowledge it. So therefore, I'm going to call it Harmony Day. So Harmony Day and anti-racism is a really great example of the two narratives in Australia in many aspects. Okay, and that is we have to move beyond Harmony Day to anti-racism. We have to move beyond fairness and egalitarian society, which of course is no longer as true as what it once might have been. Wealth and income inequality is at an all-time high, both here in the US and elsewhere. But we have to, nevertheless, we have to move from thinking or talking about fairness and egalitarianism to injustice. That's no good just saying that we want a fair, no. That's unjust. We have to help Indigenous Australia get back to where we are now, and that actually takes progressive measures. And under international human rights law, this is contemplated. What they say is, equality, there's equality and then there's equity. So equality means that we all have the same opportunities. That's wonderful, but we're not starting from the same starting position. Some people got a handicap, like the stall gift. This is not like the Olympic 100-meter final where they're all on a straight line. This is a stall gift. So First Nations are like way back there somewhere, and you look back and you can't even see them in the race. They got no chance of getting up there and winning the prize. Many, many of them, right? I'm just saying as a concept. So therefore, that, stepping across that divide and actually going from that to injustice, that means you have to fight for things now. It's not good enough just to say, look, I support all of these things. It doesn't matter. You actually have to do something for them. This is where Black Lives Matter has been really powerful, because it's anti-racism. And therefore what they're saying is, one of the best statements to come out of that was silence is violence. And I think that's right. It's taught people a lot. I'm a white, in almost every way, privileged Australian. When I played for Australia, I thought I did a marvelous thing in getting there, but I never realized when I was young that no one ever looked at me and said, well, I don't like your religion. I don't like the look of you. I don't like your color. And I don't trust you. No one ever said that with me, right? I'm an Anglo-Australian. By Anglo, I mean my family comes from England. So, in some of the early boats. So therefore, I speak English. They didn't say, oh, well, I can't understand you, and you've got a funny name, and I'm gonna anglicize your name and have a laugh about it, and blah blah blah. Right? That never happened to me. So therefore, who has a real responsibility to challenge these things? Is it the people who are suffering racism, who usually are minorities, or is it people who have profited from racism and are in positions of authority, profile, or influence? That's the question that the world has had to wrestle with in contemporary times, I think almost entirely because of Black Lives Matter. Because what they brilliantly did was said, you have to talk up with us. And let's take Kaepernick, for example, right? I'm not sure Kaepernick said anything, but some of the African-American black athletes said, well, our white teammates, it's no good just standing and saying nothing anymore. Like, you guys are either with us or against us, because people are dying here. And that, I hope there's going to be more of that in society going forward. There's no, silence is violence. Sorry. It's no good just having a nice house, good cars, do all this. I'm a great management. I'm a great CEO of a company. I've done wonderful things. I do a bit of charity, this and that, but I've never said anything for Indigenous Australians, the vast majority of whom never going to have the opportunity to be where I am now. And I don't want to say anything about that. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, you're right. And it's the idea of forgotten people, like you were talking about, the people that are just like, they're just invisible to everyone else. It's like, as long as I'm good, everything else is okay. But extraordinary stuff. I wanted to switch gears and kind of talk about a lighter topic, maybe your football career a little bit. But I want to go from like a chronological order, because we don't really hear too much about, first of all, how you got to where you are. And then on top of that, like, we don't hear too much about your stint in England and stuff like that. So what got a young Craig Foster into football?
Well, the reason I don't talk about a huge amount is because there's a lot of other stuff to do, but also I think most of the power and the reason for sport is to provide opportunities for people to then go do other good stuff. And ultimately it's just kicking a ball around, and we all love it, and I love to talk about it, and I love the best teams in the world, and I'll always play some role when it comes to broadcasting the game and things, because it's just too great. But we always have to put in perspective. The other reason is that there's many great players, and I wasn't one. So I was pleased to be able to play for the Socceroos. I had a whole heap of injuries in my career that I just had to keep battling. Like, my career was as much about just keep going, don't give up, and that's some of the good things about sport. The human stories in sport are the most important. It's not being able to kick a ball and curl it over a wall. It's the fact that people have to be there, and they have to overcome losses, and they have to overcome heartache, and they have to keep going. That, they're the beautiful stories that we love. So it was mostly about that. So, when I talk about football, I prefer to talk about the great players, people who played 200 times for their country, or, Timmy Cahill's. And the thing for me is I played with some of our greatest players ever. And so I know how great they were. And so therefore, I worked hard to be there. But I recognise that, I have 29 caps. There's people with, well in excess of 100 caps. So, I hope that sport teaches us some humility, and therefore, what's the point of spending hours talking about your own career? It's a part of your life that you're very proud of. But there's other people doing even better. That's the beauty of football. Like, no one's Maradona. There's only one Maradona.
I get you, 100%. So the reason why like when I hear stuff like that from you, for example, it's like there's an element of realism to you, which is like, it's quite admiring for people like us, because every day you kind of wake up with this like imposter syndrome sometimes, and people around you start to notice that like they don't really know what you're going through. So you're talking about Simone Biles, for example. She was one of the greatest Olympians ever, like especially for her country, and at such a young age. And then they kind of like isolate the human experience away from the actual athlete themselves, But I wanted to like just touch on the perseverance aspect of things for you. Like, what was it that like, is it the love of football, or was it the this idea that you had to like prove to yourself that you could do it? You know what I mean? Like, what was it that drove you mostly?
Well, it wasn't the love, because, I still play today. I'm 52. I play in the over 35s up here. Like, you're always going to play, right? So, the love is just a given. And so it didn't matter if I was a professional or played for Australia or otherwise. I would have just been playing in the park. So, no, it's more about, I think everyone probably has times in their life where, difficulties are part of the human condition, part of the human experience. We all face essentially the same things at different times throughout our life. We just respond to it in different ways. And, we all have a range of challenges, whether it's, whether it's personal, whether it's relational, family, or whether it's, in terms of your career, whatever that means to you. We all have things that we want to achieve. Sport is kind of easy in a way, because the achievement path is very straightforward. Whereas people in other fields, I guess if you're an academic, you might, clearly see that you want to be a professor. In business, I guess, people can create their own idea of success. In sport, it's really simple. You're going to go there, be a professional. You're either going to play for Australia or you aren't, and you can, you can go and play for the top teams in the world if if you're able to get there. So it's about having, I think we all have a vision of what we'd like to achieve. Mine these days changes a lot, much more than what it did. The thing about sport is you do tend to be very focused, and sport does exist in a bubble, and you've seen that during the Olympic Games. I say disappointing, but it's not unexpected, and I'm not criticising the athletes. I am criticising the sports, because people who run the sports tend to be A, much more mature and older, and B, should have a much better understanding of the world. And very few sports, let alone athletes in Tokyo during the Olympics, have made any comments about the Japanese situation with COVID and what's occurring there, and the imposition of the Olympics on Japan. Very few at all. Like I've virtually seen. I saw Kate Campbell, a swimmer, made some good comments. I don't think they were carried back here in Australia. Someone sent me the transcript of her press conference. Is the only way I haven't seen anything. But the sports should be talking about it. And so, so the athletes tend to be very clear on what it is that they need to achieve. And, the top level of world sport is so highly competitive that it takes immense focus. That's why I think there's a lot of room, a lot of scope for training on human rights, and for sports and people around athletes to help them be more worldly, to understand what's going on politically, and I think you probably need some support there. So anyway, you understand what it is that you need to achieve, and the only decision is, are you going to keep going to try and get there? And the more that injury afflicts an athlete, the more doubts can surface, as other people go on to achieve things. You're still battling away, and all of a sudden, you break another bone or you do another knee. But it's those aspects of sport that we love and come to really respect. When you see in the Olympics, an athlete's had gone through a huge amount of injury problems and personal issues, and had to keep going and going, and then win something, or even competes at that level. It's very, I think, emotionally charged and heartening to see, because you see a reflection of what everyone else is going through, whether they're battling mental health or they're battling, family and other issues. So I just kept going. I wanted to get there, and I just didn't stop. I wouldn't stop. I kept going. I didn't play for Australia till 26, which is, really quite old.
Yeah. I know you like to palm off the how do I like to say it? Like how good it was, but like there is still this question. Like you did make it to the highest level. You kind of went and played for Crystal Palace, for 3 years or whatever it was. What was it like getting the call up? Like, hey, come down. We need it. We want to see you play for us in England.
You mean to go there?
Oh, just in general, the whole experience, like the call, and then you going there and settling in and all that.
Look, it's amazing. I basically call it the Hollywood of sport. It's a very unreal environment. It's a very closeted environment. It's an environment with a lot of financial riches, whether that's the owners of the clubs or the players themselves, or people who want to surround themselves, in the sports or football environment. There's a lot of wealth and ostentatiousness everywhere, and it's very easy to get caught up in that. Sorry, my dog's going absolutely nuts here. Because my wife's just come home. It's in some respects, it's incredibly enjoyable to be able to compete at that level. The intensity of the environment is what's most enjoyable. So, it's public. It's, you've got a huge amount of fans and people following every day, intensely excited, interested in it. And, every week you go out and perform in front of a whole bunch of people. It's a bit, in some ways, it must be a bit like what the Colosseum was, in Rome, except you're not dying, you're not being eaten by lions or speared, right? But it's an incredible environment. The thing about it was, though, I was always a bit detached from it, even when I was playing in the Socceroos and all of those things. I always was studying other things. I was always reading about things outside of sport. I was never just caught in sport, ever. And I always found that part of it a little bit difficult. I found that probably the majority, but of most of the players that I was playing with were just incredibly focused on football. That had been their whole life, and that was really all they were interested in. And I never, so I was always, if you like, a little bit different in that respect. And so I quite a lot, I found it difficult to really join in, the jokes and the way things were being run. I just wasn't really that interested in it. So I kind of just had my own life all the time and other things, as well as being in football, whereas that's not always the case.
So I can kind of see where the commentary career stemmed from, like, because you're kind of like, you're in love with the sport and all that sort of stuff, but not too in love with the thing that surrounds it, like you're more so, yeah, sorry, carry on.
True. What happened is I came back here and I wasn't embedded in it, and I had an idea, a different idea. I'm not saying it's a better idea, but I had a very different idea to most players or former players as to where the game sat in Australia, where I thought it needed to head, what it meant culturally to the country, what multiculturalism was about, why the game was important to grow here, and all of those things I was very focused on. And that is largely because, I had been, thinking thinking through those things for a very long time, not just about how to be a number 6 or number 8 or a number 10.
Definitely. I wanted to, because obviously I've seen videos of your commentary at the World Cup in '06, you know, and I think everybody in Australia at the time was just losing their minds at how well the Aussies played, and some may go as far as to say it was the golden generation for Australian football, you know. What was it that like you know what I mean? Like you would expect, because the MLS right now is like booming, and you see the American football kind of like moving in a direction where it's built itself like a nice foundation from, for example, Landon Donovan and Dempsey playing, and we had like Kuehl and Schwarzer and Viduka here, and also Timmy Cahill, you know. So we had some amazing footballers at the time. Why is it that you think we're not in the position we should be in as a country, as a footballing nation, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but the main one is that the game has always had to survive, and it's always had to fight against, in part, a national culture that was, struggled with immigration. The game has always struggled to reconcile with the broader national culture, and for that reason has always, I think, had a bit of a small mentality, and not confident enough in its own culture and in its own history. And we've seen this in recent times when the game nationally decided not to be multicultural. It decided just to be, one brand of just Australian, and therefore the cultures couldn't be brought to life through the game at all. So there's a shame in the game of football about what multiculturalism meant. And of course that brought a whole heap of problems, including, different ethnic groups, fighting against each other. But that is the history of immigration in Australia. That's actually the history of migrant communities. And that was brought to life through football. So at a time when Australia is most proud in a superficial way, but is still very proud of the multicultural and diverse nature of the country, football itself went the other way and said, well, we don't want to be multicultural. We just want to be Australian. We just want to be green and gold. We don't want to be all these flags underneath. Whereas Australia is saying, we want to be all the flags, not just green and gold, because we want First Nations to be held up. And we want to know about all of our African communities and our Asian communities. So football took the opposite, really out of this deep desire to fit in and to be part of really, truly Australian. Whereas all it needed to do was to actually realise that it is truly Australian. It's actually the most truly Australian, because it is the most reflective of what Australia is. And Australia, a multicultural, diverse country, is messy in many ways. There's a huge amount of diversity and we all have to come together and get on. And we do that under shared rules of, democracy, rule of law, and other things, and the secular nature of the country and all of these things. But the thing is, football decided not to talk about that. And so it's also been always very heavy factionalized. And so in the same way that the federal nature of the states and Commonwealth has been a huge factor in both pro and cons of the management of the pandemic, with some states managing well and others less so, that's the same in football. So the states have always carried a great deal of power, and they've very largely acted unilaterally and against the national agenda. And that's why we say that football in Australia has always been very political. What I think, I was going to say what disappoints me. It doesn't disappoint me. What I think is one of the great challenges for the game, I put it that way, and challenge. There's a tremendous bounty for Australian football if it can recognise its power through true multiculturalism, and be honest about that. And that means embracing the challenges, at the same time as talking about it, but also about the socially progressive sport. So, football is the global sport. That means climate action to us is natural because the countries we play against in football, they're the ones who are going underwater or are getting drought or are having to flee. So football is the global sport. It should give us a view of shared humanity. Like everyone in football, in my view, should be human rights advocates. Of course we are. We're the global game. What do you expect we're going to do? We want people to be treated well around the world. We're the game that should support refugees and asylum seekers. Of course we are. The captain of the Olyroos, the under-23s, is a South Sudanese refugee. Awa Mabil is a South Sudanese refugee. Okay, of course they shouldn't be just refugees, but the concept of refugee has been so demonized in Australia that it's become a pejorative term. It's like it's a negative. Oh, you're a refugee. Oh, how did you get here? Whereas they're just obviously just the people who need a home. So we should be fighting for them. Like the whole game of football should be saying, get them off Manus and so on. Like, how can we not be doing that as a game? Look at all the refugees, they play football. Right? I went to PNG, 18 months ago or 2 years ago, whatever it is. And I played football with them. And the first thing they said to me is, oh, you played for Australia? I said, yeah. And they said, oh, we watched the game in Iran, the Iranians. I said, oh, we watched the game in 97. We were little kids in school. I said, oh, thanks for reminding me. And they said, can we play a game of football? But of course, that's the connection that we understand in football. That's natural for us. You can't be xenophobic if you're in football. It's not possible. You shouldn't be bigoted. Prejudice is everywhere and it has to always be fought. But you shouldn't be prejudiced and bigoted if you're a football fan, a person in football. How can you be? How can you support Raheem Sterling if you're a Man City fan and then be racist? Like someone explained that to me, right? How can you support, I'll just use Man City as an example. How can you support Man City, and you've got all the colours of the rainbow of humanity in one team and you're cheering them on going, we're going to win the Champions League. And then you go out to the street and be a racist. Like it's not actually possible in my view. Okay. So therefore, these are the beautiful parts of the game that the game doesn't leverage, doesn't understand well enough, not in Australia anyway. And by that, I mean, football in Australia should be fighting for climate action. Of course we should. It's all the people we play. It's all our fellow football fans around the world who are being affected by it. It's all the countries where we play against, Africa, South Asia, the Pacific. Like we used to play in Oceania. And so what, we don't care about them? So all of these issues, I think, are reflected very well through football. And I don't think the game understands that well enough. And one thing I am committed to is to trying to help the game in Australia in particular come to terms with its responsibility to be global citizens and to speak up for humanity, because that's ultimately what the game is supposed to be.
Definitely. You touched upon your age. This isn't me bringing it up, but you've obviously lived through a fair bit and you've watched football since a young age. I wanted to ask, who is the greatest footballer you've ever seen or witnessed yourself?
Well, I'll just say, because I didn't see Maradona play. I've seen Messi play. Yeah. I went to Nou Camp, Camp Nou a few times and I saw him play live, and that was very special. To see him, you just see the speed of action, the ability, the unexpected, the brilliance, the ability to do things that, you just can't conceptualize, just pull passes out of nowhere, execute them unbelievably, pull things down that, you don't think is, someone can do. And then start a dribble where you just think, how is it possible to go past all those people? When you see that live, when you see real genius live, it's very, very special. It's beautiful on TV, but when you see it, it's something else. The best that I played against was when we played Brazil in 1997, and that 97 in Confed Cup. And of course we drew against them 0-0. And then we made the final. We ended up with 10 men. We had someone sent off, and then they just smashed us, right? But the reason they smashed us is because they were one of the finest teams the world has seen for a very long time. They're the team in 98 that Zidane and his team beat in the final when Ronaldo didn't play. So that team, they were coming out and for the younger football fans might not even know, but the older football fans will know the names. The team sheet that they were pulling out was some of the most historic Brazil players, which means some of the greats ever, right? Not the 70 team and, or Jairzinho and Tostão and all these guys. But I'll tell you what, they're in that conversation. The front, well, El Fenomeno, Ronaldo, okay, it was just, so he's probably the best I've ever seen on a field, on the same field as me. Rivaldo and Romario. So the three R's. Rivaldo, no, but Romario and Ronaldo, two of the greatest players in the history of the game, two of the greatest ever. Like, they'd have to be in the top 20, 25 Brazilian players in history. I mean, Ronaldo's in the discussion for top 5 players ever. That's their forward line. Then they had the fullbacks were Cafu and Roberto Carlos.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, and then they had Juninho Paulista, the one who come and played for Sydney FC, and they had Dunga. I mean, he was around a long time as a captain. I mean, that was a staggering team, particularly the forward line. They played against 10 men, Australia, in a final that they wanted to win, and it was just like you may as well not even be there.
Do you feel shell shocked? You feel shell shocked when you see Ronaldo Rosario just sitting there on the other side of the pitch? Like, you're just like, wow, okay. At that time, obviously, he wasn't really.
You can't, no, because players can't be fans in those moments. You learn not to be. Otherwise, you just couldn't play against them. You players kind of learn to, be able to just confront any opponents, without too much consideration of how brilliant they are. But later on, when you retire and you look back, you think, oh my God, geez. Those guys were just staggering. I mean, Romario is one of the greatest goal scorers. I mean, I used to watch him. He was at PSV, but when he went to Barcelona, I remember watching him, with Stoichkov and all of these guys, and Koeman was there, and Laudrup. It's a staggering team. And, young kids who don't know Romario, he came and played with Adelaide United, of course, a few games, but he was, I think, around 40 then. Just have a look at his goal scoring. Like, you're talking about a genius level. That's just, it's amazing.
And the funny thing about this generation is they see Ronaldo Rosario as fat Ronaldo, because you got Cristiano here, and the disrespect is just too real,
Yeah, and that's because his fame also is, at a different level to what the last generation was. They've got, I don't know what he's got. He's got like 200 million or 150 million or something on Twitter and Instagram and these things. Like, it's a level of fame that, is historic. Whereas people go back and watch El Fenomeno, when he was at Inter, for example, or Barca. If he didn't have that bad knee injury that he had, he would have been, I think, probably the greatest player in all time. Like, he was just unbelievable.
Definitely. I wanted to, because I don't know, I did my own Google search before I did this interview with you, and I came across a fact that you were the Ballon d'Or voter when KAKA was voted as the Ballon d'Or winner in 2007. I wanted to ask whether or not you did vote for him, or was Cristiano Ronaldo on the sheet? Or you're not allowed to disclose this information?
I can't remember. But yeah, I fulfilled that role for quite a few years. That was for France football prior to FIFA taking it over. So France Football Magazine was probably the most respected football magazine in the world. The very best writers and analysis, and it was a bit of a football bible for fans, and they actually had the Ballon d'Or themselves, and so it was nice to be asked. FIFA subsequently did a partnership with them and took it over, and once that happens, what happens with FIFA?
Yeah, it's all over.
Marketing and it's nowhere near as real anymore. That they were all journalists, actually, former players and journalists that used to select the Ballon d'Or. Like, they were experts. That was their profession. What, of course, then FIFA does is now the captains and everyone votes. It just becomes different. Not that it's not good, but it's very different. So there was a level of analysis. You had to write your reasons on every player, and it was a significant amount of work when France Football had it. Anyway, I can't recall, but I'm pretty sure I would have voted for, in 07, I would have voted for KAKA. That team that won the Champions League was unbelievable. And KAKA was at his peak then. He was an unbelievable player. I loved him. The way he just got it and just glided past players, and, you know, his free kicks, his passing ability. Wow, what a player. In fact, I think it was that year, I remember they played Manchester United at Old Trafford and they beat them. And that was an unbelievable performance. They were so good.
And I wanted to end off on this last question. Might get you in a bit of flack, but I want to see. I think it's a question everyone has. Who's the greatest Socceroo of all time?
Oh, gee, oh man, that again is hard. You know, if you look at just the stats and the performance in big moments, you've got to say Timmy Cahill. You know, because he delivered in World Cups at key moments. You know, whether it's against Japan or otherwise, and in big qualification games, and went to a number of World Cups. You know, you just can't surpass that. You know, a greatest all-time scorer, amazing. The trouble with history is, of course, the players today and in Timmy's era were playing at least probably twice the number of games that we played in our era, and we played twice the number of games as the guys before, and it's always been thus. So, I mean, in Ray Bart's and Johnny Warren's era, they probably played an average of twice a year, I would guess, right? So those guys used to be in the team for 10 years and have 15 caps, right? Whereas today, if you're in the Socceroos or Matildas for 10 years, you've got 120, 130 caps probably. So, you know, everything's very different. So it's hard to compare. But, you know, one of the best probably, I mean, I played with some great players. You know, Paul Ocon was an amazingly gifted and elegant player, just ravaged by injury. Ned Zelic was an incredibly gifted, skilled player, just glide past players, you know, and people forget he played in a great Borussia Dortmund team. And so some really great players, but probably the best was Harry. You know, it takes a lot for me to, you know, accept that Timmy is, you know, the greatest when I was there with Harry and I saw what he did even as a very young kid. You know, let me put it this way. I put those two guys, you know, I say, look, you guys battle it out. I don't care who wins it because, you know, you're both just incredible. Harry was something special. And Harry also did what Craig Johnston did. Harry performed, and with Mark Viduka, they performed for Leeds, and then Harry with Liverpool, even though he was injury ravaged. They built much of the game back here, and I don't think the game gives them enough credit for that. Like, there's people, look what happened when Liverpool came and played against Melbourne Victory or whoever else, and they had 95,000 people at MCG. Why do you think that is? There's not 95,000 English expats from Liverpool live in Melbourne or Australia. That is because a whole generation of football fans in this country watched Craig Johnston playing for Liverpool in an extraordinary team, you know, with Souness and Dalglish, and it was an unbelievable team, winning the European Cup in '84. He built much of what you see today. Craig Johnston, by doing that. Harry was also, I think, had that level of recognition. Dukes was unbelievable, but kids loved Harry, right? And that built tens and if not hundreds of thousands of new football fans in the country were built by watching and thrilling to what Harry Kewell did, and that's pretty special.
Definitely agree with that. That's how I got into it. 2006 World Cup. Right. Seeing Timmy Cahill light it up and Harry Kewell, amazing. Oh, I remember watching. I even watched it before we did this interview. I watched the commentary and how you were. I'll be honest with you, rightly so frustrated with the decision from the referee giving the Italians that penalty. But at least we lost to the champions, you know. At least we lost to the World Cup winners.
Yeah, I mean, and you always, you know, you're gonna get those decisions sometimes. That's what World Cups are about. You know, but the thing about all those World Cups is you know, football fans will understand, but when we're on air with Les and that, we understood the power of those moments on the game back here. So SBS were never just commentators or analysts, whatever. We always were very aware of how important those moments were to grow the game back in Australia. It wasn't just about broadcasting and getting numbers. It was about showing Australia the game. And that's why so often our emotion carried over, because those moments we knew if we made a quarterfinal at the World Cup here, like what is that going to do, And Ukraine would have, I think, been the opponent. It could have been a South Korea, in 02, making a semi-final of a World Cup. Look what happened. And the same with the Matildas. There's, from my perspective, as an ex-player, as a football broadcaster and someone in the game who has a voice, there's always two aspects. One is analysing the technical aspect of the game. Look at the Matildas in the World Cup, in the Olympics. Okay, how are they playing? Are they playing well? Where's the improvement needed? Are they bringing a generation through? Is the young kids coming? How good are they? Where are we based? What's the style of play? Where are we falling down? That's fine. But there's also always been for us the broader picture of what is it doing for football in Australia? And that's always was equally important to us. I look at now, the future of the game of football should be very bright in Australia if people can stop fighting, stop the politics, and actually get down to understanding the power of the game, believing in that, and committing to that instead of committing to their own positions, their own state, their own board position, their own club. Commit to what football is going to bring to the game, commit to the beauty of multiculturalism through football, and give to the game. Don't take from it, right? But if you have a look at, what could happen only in a couple of years in 2023, I mean, the Matildas more than doubled the record broadcast audience for a women's team sport in Australian history, okay? In their second group game against Sweden, and most of Australia, I think, wouldn't even know that Sweden are very good in football. You know what I mean? Like it's not a historic. They'd know that USA are the world champions. So why Sweden? Well, it's not about Sweden. It's about Matildas. They more than doubled the TV audience in history. Like that is staggering. And then they went into the quarterfinal, put another 800,000 on. I don't know what the last one was, but they got up. They were 1.5 million in the first game. Then they got to like 2.3 million. So they put another million on. They already broke the record. They put another million on. And then they've got the third and fourth playoff and so on. We don't know what. But can you imagine if they get to a quarterfinal, semi-final, or a final of the 2023 World Cup? Don't even worry about the record books. And we had, with the greatest respect to cricket, which I am, I used to play cricket, and I love the Australian women's cricket team because they're real warriors for gender equality. I love them. But they had the World Cup at home in Australia, and they were in the World Cup final on free-to-air TV, and the Matildas beat that broadcast record in their second group game of an Olympics. Yeah. Like that is staggering. Okay, that is staggering. That is the power of football. It is very significant. If they make the semi-final or final, you're talking about, half the country watching them. Okay, and that's the beauty of the game. And people need to respect that and respect the fact that if you are fortunate enough to play a role in football and to have some form of governance or management or something, you have a big responsibility. It's not about you. It's about the game and the country and what the game can do for the country, can do for women, can do for young females, can do for gender equality. And you have to live up to that. Okay. And if you don't, then you're selling the game short. And that's the biggest crime there is. Definitely.
Big things going on there. I wanted to thank you very much for your time, Craig. Hopefully Sydney opens up soon and we get to come down and maybe do a couple of amnesty runs with you, and then maybe go to the park and have a bit of a 3-on-3. Don't slide tackle any of us, please. All of us have got bad ankles, I'll be honest. But all good. I appreciate it.
Looking busy. Definitely. Just keep screaming at everyone. Give me the ball. Give me the ball. What are you doing?
Don't worry. You're gonna have a lot of issues trying to get over Ash's voice, to be honest, if you're but now. It'll be all good.
It'll be great. One day we play together. That's what it's all about.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Craig.
Good to chat. My
We'll,
pleasure.
we'll see you soon, huh? Thank you.
Okay. All the best.